This is where the atheist has a field day. You guys believe there's a God that's worried about whether or not you stole like a little Kit Kat from the grocery store? You're so self-centered that this entire universe, He created all of this, but He's focused on you. You're that important. Your religion is not teaching you humility, it's teaching you arrogance. You think atheists are self-centered? You guys are the most self-centered. You think you're the center of the universe. You're the center of God's attention. God should pay attention to you. He doesn't have any black holes to worry about. He doesn't have entire galaxies to worry about. There are two opinions on what the word najm means in the Arabic language. Najm can also mean blades of grass or low plants, plants that you can walk on and they don't get damaged. Essentially, you can think of them as blades of grass, right? So there are two interpretations here. There are a number of ways we can translate this ayah. Here's a few. And even the star, and I noticed I put the word star in capital, and we'll see why that is. And even the star and the tree fall in humility, and even the star and the tree bow, will, actually meant to say, shall bow in surrender. And even the blade of grass and the tree bow in surrender. So the third one I said blade of grass, right? As opposed to star, because najm has both meanings. So this is kind of a quick overview of what this ayah is about and what it's referring to. But now we're going to get a little deeper and talk about an important concept in language. So, what's sajda? Somebody explain it to me. You guys know what sajda is? You guys know what salah is? You guys know what ruku' is? You guys know what qiyam? You guys know these things, right? So these are words we use as Muslims, and they have a particular meaning. Islam came and gave these words a specific meaning. The word sajda used to have a meaning before Islam. But when Islam came and Muslims started using this word, the sajda in Islam is a very specific kind of ritual, right? So what happens in language is there's a word that has a meaning, and then when a science or a new subject or a new culture or revolution even takes over, then that same word can have a different meaning, right? So an interesting non-religious example of that is a bird used to tweet, and now presidents do, right? So with the emergence of technology, the same word now has a completely different meaning, right? So, this guy is tweeting so much. If you said that to somebody in the 1980s, they would recommend you to a psychiatric ward, which they should probably still do. But anyway, the word sajda, we think of it as, putting our head on the ground, putting our palms on the side, and that's the image of sajda in our mind. But the Quran and Arabic language actually use the word sajda beyond the ritual meaning also. Okay, so this ayah is going to use it beyond the ritual meaning. So we have to go back into the origins of Arabic. How was the word being used in Arabic before Islam came along, right? And then we can appreciate what's happening inside of this ayah, because it is saying whether it's the star or the blade of grass and the tree, they're both doing sajda. Yes, Judan, they're both doing sajda. So what does that mean? As-sujud asluhu at-tatamun wat-tadhallul wal-inqiyad. The origin of sujud is to bow down, to lower yourself, to humble yourself, to weaken yourself, and to come to a position of surrender. Like the image of a soldier laying down his arms and falling on his knees before the enemy? Like that kind of an image. When you become overpowered and overwhelmed and you fall in surrender, that's the image actually of sujud. وَجُعِلَ ذَلِكَ عِبَارَةً عَنِ التَّذَلُّلِ لِلَّهِ وَعِبَادَتِهِ. And this then became a term to express that powerlessness we feel before Allah and in our worship to Him. They used to say, نَخْلَةٌ سَاجِدَةٌ أَمَالَهَا حَمْلُهَا. A palm tree that is doing sajda. A palm tree doing sajda. When its branches used to, the weight of the fruit would bow it down and would lower its branches. وَعَيْنٌ سَاجِدَةٌ فَاتِرَةُ الطَّرْفِ. They used to say about an eye that's doing sajda when it's kind of looking down. Like when the eye just kind of lowers. That's actually عَيْنٌ سَاجِدَةٌ. سجدت النخلة مالت بذلك سجدت الإبل وأسجدت خفضت رأسها لتركب. When When the camel lowers its head so you can ride on it, they say the camel is doing sajda. So it's not doing an act of worship, it's just humbling itself for the owner so they can get on it. وكان كسرى يسجد للسهم الطالع أن يخفض رأسه إذا شخص سهمه عن الرمية. I thought this was pretty funny. ليستقيم السهم. So Khaysaurus, the Persian emperor, Kisra, he used to love doing archery. So when he would do archery, he wasn't a good archer apparently. So he would overshoot the target, so the target is here and the arrow would go over it. Right? And he knows that it's going to fly over. So when it was flying over, they say he used to do sajda, meaning he used to kind of lower his head as if he's instructing the arrow to go down. Like what you do in video games, like, you know. And that was called him lowering his head to kind of almost instruct the arrow to go down with it. This was called sajda. So the idea of sujood then is basically humility and lowering yourself. Of course, the ultimate beautiful expression of that humility and lowering yourself is the ritual that the Prophet taught us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the way that we do sajda. But any act of lowering yourself and humbling yourself can actually be described as a sajda. Okay, so then what it's saying is the star and the tree, they both humble themselves. They both lower themselves. So you don't have to, how does the tree do sajda? It doesn't have two hands. What it's going to do? No, just relax. It doesn't have to do any of that for it to do sajda. But we're going to dig into what could that mean. Now, ismu jam'ina ala nujum as-sama, this najm could refer to all the stars in the sky. It could also refer to, like I said, low plants that don't have a bark, that don't have a stem, like blades of grass. And they're attached to the ground. يسجدان من حيث التقابل لما أن الشمس والقمر علويان. Alusi says he likes the view that this is referring to grass. So the grass and the tree, okay, they do sajda. So he says it's beautiful because in the previous ayah, the sun and the moon follow Allah on the precise count, and now the lower beings, the tree and the grass, they humble themselves before Allah. So the high and the low are all in submission to Allah. So that's kind of how he contrasts these two. سجودهما أنهما يستقبلان الشمس إذا طلعت ثم يميلان معها حتى ينكسر الفيء. Qurtubi says their humility, the humility of grass and the tree, is that when the sun rises, in photosynthesis, the flower turns towards the sun, right? So the fact that the tree and its branches or its leaves, they incline towards the sun, and the blade of grass turns towards the sun, that is its sajda. خُضُوعُهُمَا لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى وَخُرُوجُهُمَا مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. How humble they are to Allah, and the way they come out of the ground, how they grow, that itself is a kind of sajda, Imam Razi says. What I'm going to share with you, there's a few things here. One is continuity of imagery. So in Surah An-Najm, Allah mentioned the star falls, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى. And falling is actually one of the meanings of sajda. So here the star is, if it's the meaning of the same najm, the star is also falling. And then there's also the star, the moon, then the sun. اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر. So Surah Al-Najm, then Surah Al-Qamar. And now we get الشمس والقمر والنجم. We get kind of the three of them together. So it's kind of picking up the pieces from the previous surahs and building up a narrative. Now, the stars are humbled by day. What does that mean? Because when the day comes, what happens to the stars? They're disappeared. They're humbled before. They don't get to show their glory. They're gone from our eyes. And the tree that looks beautiful and is a source of shade and source of comfort and a mark of beauty during the day, like your backyard, becomes humbled at night. Because now it doesn't have any of those features. Its charms are gone. Perhaps the two phrases symbolic of the sky and the earth, meaning the sky, the star referring to the sky, and the tree referring to the earth. The possible connection to Judgment Day. Now let's talk about that. Remember in the previous ayah, one of its implications, husban, is that the sun and the moon are on the verge of destruction now, because the Quran has now come. If that is the meaning, then one of the underlying meanings of this ayah can be that the star and the tree will eventually be falling into sajda. They're going to be falling. Now, the Quran does say, إِذَا الْكَوَاكِبُ انْتَثَرَتْ. And he says, إِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ. When the stars lose their light, or when the planets and the heavenly bodies start falling down. And falling down is the image of what again? Of sajda. But what does the tree doing sajda have to do with anything? My reading of this is, Allahu A'lam, the Arabs, because the place in which the Quran was revealed was a desert climate, open landscape, and a very harsh weather. Like, you guys know now recently there's some new greenery in the area, but like overall that place is extremely, extremely harsh climate, right? And even Ibrahim alayhi salam described it as wadin ghayri dhi zar', right? A valley that doesn't cultivate. Now, for the Arab, at night, the night sky is maybe the more beautiful than any other place in the world. Possibly. Why? Because there's no development, there's no city lights, and it's clear night desert sky. So there's not a place in the sky where you don't see stars. We don't have that experience anymore because we see some stars, but it's not like the actual night sky of the desert. If you see the night sky of the desert, you'd be in shock. That's what the sky looks like? Right? There's not a place you don't see stars. It's completely packed. So for the Arab, and this is something I've taught in Surah An-Najm, for the ancient Arab, they had a very romantic connection with the night sky. And they knew a lot about the stars. They actually had names for all the stars, for many of the stars and constellations. They used them in poetry. They used to talk about stars the way you talk about like NBA athletes. Honestly, like, when they used to trash talk to each other, like he thinks he's all that. Oh, he thinks he's Thuraya. He thinks he's the constellation Pleiades. Or you think that's your uncle or something? Like that's how they used to talk to each other. Like you say, oh, you think you're LeBron? Like, that's what they would say back, So, إِذَا الْكَوَاكِبُ انْتَثَرَتْ إِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ. The most beautiful thing to the Arab in the night sky, what was the night sky at night? But what's the most beautiful thing to the Arab in the day? What do you think? It's not beautiful. The sun is not beautiful to the Arab. The sun is definitely not beautiful to the Arab. If they can find out in the desert landscape somewhere, if they can find a single what? Tree, man, that is amazing. A tree? Because that's a rare commodity. The symbol of beauty in Arab literature and tradition and culture, the symbol of beauty at night is the night sky. And the symbol of beauty in the day is what? The tree, right? And those two are the ones that are falling. وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ. The two symbols that catch their eye more than anything else are the ones that are about to fall into sajda. So everything you know to be beautiful, everything you know to find comfort in, right? And the other interesting thing with stars and trees are sustenance and the stars are guidance, right? And those are the two things. Like in the desert, you need sustenance and you need guidance. And they used to navigate by way of the stars, are going to fall into sajda. Allah is also perhaps saying here that all of the universe, even right now, not even as Judgment Day comes, but even right now, everything is actually in complete humility before Allah. And I find this really interesting language because of this. In order to actually explain this to you, I'm going to take you to Surah An-Najm. I've had to do this the last couple of times because it's just that important. The Arabs used to use the word An-Najm not just for just any stars. In many of their poetries, they use the word An-Najm for a particular constellation of stars. The Arabs call it Ath-Thuraya. Okay? And in English, we call it the Pleiades. Okay? Or the Pleiades. That's a constellation in the sky that the Arabs were particularly fascinated with. Okay? Now, you need to know some things about that because the Quran is making reference to it. One of the things you have to know is the Arabs used to tell whether winter season is starting or summer season is starting or spring season is starting by where Pleiades was in the sky. When the night came and they saw Pleiades right over their head, right above, like the noon time in the sun, they knew that now as the night goes on, it's going to fall in the west. That means winter is coming. If the next season around, they see that as soon, right before Fajr starts, the sun rises from the east, right before Fajr starts, they see that same Thuraya constellation right above the horizon. It disappears because the sun comes up. But if they see it there, you know what that means? Spring and summer are on the way. This was their understanding of the Najm. Okay? So the Najm is actually associated with seasons. The Najm is associated with seasons. And perhaps there's a connection being made between the stars and the seasons. And the seasons have to do with when the tree is going to grow. When Najmu was shajaru, this was something very well known to the ancient Arabs. And it's picking on something. One of the things that really makes our study of the Quran beautiful is to understand some things about ancient Arabian culture. Because Allah is actually the first audience of the Quran are the ancient Arabs. And if you don't understand their culture, you're going to miss out on some things that the Quran is saying. Right? And so, really important stuff that's being talked about here when Allah says that An-Najm is the changing of the seasons. And of course, that's tied to the tree. And they both, as if to say the seasons do sajda. The sky does sajda and the earth does sajda. The winter does sajda and the summer does sajda. All of that gets encapsulated inside of these words. It's also interesting that the Najm, like I said in Surah An-Najm, was actually doing a sajda. It was doing hawa, it was falling. Literally, the Najm starts up there. As the night continues, it falls down towards the western horizon. Right? So, وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ And the sky, He raised it and laid down the balancing scale. This is one of the heaviest 3 ayat, 7, 8, and 9 are tough ayat. And I pray I'm able to do some justice explaining this to you and tying all of this together. So Allah now is going to go from the sun, the moon, the star, the tree. Now we're going to go back to the entire horizon, the sky. Clearly a connection is being made between the sky and the earth, right? Another connection is now going to be made. And that is, He raised the sky and put down the scale. Raised the sky, put down the scale. So the first thing I want you to note here before we get inside of the ayah is, in the previous ayah we saw the stars and the tree, right? And the tree gives what to the Arab? Well, other than beauty, what does the tree give the Arab? Fruit, shade, material, construction material. Most importantly, fruit. Food. It's a food source, right? So there's an association between the sky and the rizq. The sky and rizq. And now there's going to be a different association. The sky and justice. So there's sky and rizq. And now there's sky and justice. We're going to have to keep these connections in mind as we move forward in the surah. Okay? Now, He says He raised the sky and put down the scale. What in the world does that mean? Well, first of all, He raised the sky sounds strange to the English reader, because how did the space is vacuum? How do you raise vacuum? Right? And it's not like the earth was created first. Now we know the earth forms over billions of years, but the rest of the universe was already much older. The earth is about 4 billion years old, but the known universe is approximately 14 billion years old, as far as we can see, right? So what does it mean that He raised the sky? This is why translations create a lot of problems. I've literally translated it and I'm not happy with translation. Why? Because you cannot translate culture. You can translate words from a dictionary, but you can't translate culture. It's called, majaz aqli in Arabic. It's a common usage. And one of the ways you can understand it is He made the sky, He meant the sky to be above you. In other words, you're down here and there's much more beyond you. So this is actually a statement about how limited your access is as a human being. وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا. He elevated, the sky is way above you, and He made it much, much higher than you. Then the other problem is, even with the word sky, what am I translating as sky? As sama. But sama is actually even a masdar. It could mean all that lies beyond or above. Now somebody could say, what do you mean above? The earth is spherical. Is this above or this above? If you're on this side of the planet, that's above. If you're on top, that's above. If you're on the South Pole, it's a different above. If you're on the North Pole, it's a different above. So which above are you talking about? I'm going to have you understand this by way of a little bit of quantum physics. But I can make it super easy. Imagine the entire universe is a marble. The entire universe is what? A marble. And the planet Earth is a little tiny dot inside that marble. right? And then all of the universe is like a marble. And of course, if you're inside that marble, you're like, which way is above? Because you could go in any direction and that could be above, right? Now, imagine there's a roof on top. The marble sitting on a table, there's something above it. Is this actually above it? Yeah, but the people inside the marble, or everything inside the marble, doesn't even understand that because it's still inside that marble. This is a different dimension. This is above and beyond that. You understand? Allah made how many skies? 7. We're in the first sky is that little marble, but then there's the second sky, it's actually above it, and then there's a third above that, and a fourth above that, and the fifth above that, and all of them can be captured in the words sama. Sama is not a reference to one sky, it's everything that is above. And Allah is describing the endless vastness of what He's created above us. And when He describes that, you're like, and if you guys watch any documentaries on the universe, which is the first sky, by the way, the physical, I said 14 billion years, that's the first sky. That's not the 7th skies, that's the first sky. This is important because Allah says, وَلَقَدْ زَيَّنَا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحِ. We decorated the lowest sky with stars. So as far as we can see stars, we're still dealing with first sky. That's just the first sky. So the light that reaches my eye from the farthest star, when I see it in the night, that light traveled 14 billion years to reach my eye. So I'm looking at 14 billion years of history. Sunlight that reaches my eye, the sunlight that we experience in the day, it takes 8 minutes to get here from the sun. You're not looking at the sun as it is now. You're looking at the sun as it was 8 minutes ago. That's actually, we're looking at history when we look at the sky, right? And beyond that is another and another, and there's 7. There's 7 of them. What does that make you feel? Oh, it makes you feel so insignificant, so insanely small. In fact, even if we didn't know about the 7 skies, if we just contemplated the first sky, we'd be like, human beings are entirely insignificant, and this is where the atheist has a field day. They're like, you guys believe there's a God that's worried about whether or not you stole like a little Kit Kat from the grocery store? You know, you're worried about that, and this entire billion, you're so self-centered that this entire universe, He created all of this, but He's focused on you. You're that important? Seriously? Your religion is not teaching you humility, it's teaching you arrogance. You think atheists are self-centered? You guys are the most self-centered. You think you're the center of the universe. You're the center of God's attention. God should pay attention to you. He doesn't have any black holes to worry about. He doesn't have entire galaxies to worry about. You know, this is the mindset. And this mindset sounds compelling. It does sound compelling. And Allah says He created a much more vast sky. And you are insignificant. So Allah, in that much I agree with the atheist. We are in size insignificant. What are we compared to this, what Allah has created? وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا. And then He says, وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ. And He put down the scale. He created a scale. Allah is now saying, in between the lines, that as vast as the universe is, I'm not just giving you rahmah. Remember the surah began with rahmah? I also hold you responsible for how you behave, because I've put some standards here. And don't you think that the universe is so big, God will be busy with other things, so I can just do my thing. It's okay. Allah's got other things to worry about. I'm sure there's a volcanic eruption somewhere in some planet somewhere that He has to deal with, so I can get away with my thing. No, He says, وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ. He put down the scale. He's directly concerned with you. If He can be directly concerned with, He can observe the blade of grass doing sajda, and the tree doing sajda, and every star doing sajda. You think you're going to get away? You think you're not being watched? You're not being observed? SubhanAllah, it's a really powerful statement that He makes when He says, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ. So what does wada'a mean? It means to send down the scale. Some said because of this ayah that Allah is saying He created a vast universe and beyond, and then He put the expectation of living according to balance on the earth. Wada'a means to bring down. That's why anzala is one of its meaning. Ayyana means to set or to appoint. So He appointed a scale. That's the hadith here is just using the word da' in the meaning of appointing. So let's look at some interpretations of this word. He set down the scale. Means وَضَعَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْعَدْلَ الَّذِي أَمَرَ بِهِ, that he laid down an expectation in this world that we should live by justice. We should live by justice. Al-Mizan al-Quran. Others said Mizan here refers to the Quran, that He brought down the Quran. وَضَعَ الْمِيزَان, He brought down the scale, and the scale is referring to the Quran itself, because the Quran is described as a scale too. أرادوا وضع الميزان في الآخرة لوزن الأعمال. Others said no, Allah made this massive sky and He laid down the grounds for the final scale, meaning the scale on Judgment Day of our deeds. That's what this is referring to. الميزان الكتاب الذي فيه أعمال الخلق, the book in which all of our deeds are written, and every deed has a weight, and every one of those deeds will be weighed on the scale. That's what this is referring to. So these are the classical opinions on this. I see, like Mawdudi's comment on this, al-adlu fi nizam al-kainat li man' al-fawda, like Allah put a scale and a harmony in the entire universe. What does the atheist see in the universe? He sees chaos. An atheist sees chaos in the universe. There's no order. We're just floating in the universe aimlessly, and at some point, some meteor might come and strike this planet and it will be over. That's the idea. Right? And Allah is saying no, He elevated the sky and He put everything in the right measure. There's a time where the sun and the moon will in fact collapse, but that's not going to happen because of some random accident. And until then, there is order and scale. Where the non-believer sees chaos, the believer actually sees mizan. They see balance. They see something else entirely. So, similar to this ayah, explaining this ayah is another ayah in the Quran. Surah Al-A'raf. Inna rabbakum Allah, your master is Allah. Alladhi khalaqa as-samawati wal-ard, the one who created the skies and the earth. Fi sittati ayyam, in 6 eras. Thumma istawa al-arsh, then He took upon the throne. Yughshi al-layla an-nahar yatlubuhu hathithan, wash-shamsa wal-qamara wal-nujuma. Sound familiar? الشمس والقمر والنجوم مسخرات بأمره, and the sun and the moon and the stars all surrendered by His command. ألا له الخلق والأمر. This is the point that I wanted to make here. You should know that creation and the command both belong to Him. There are 2 concepts here, creation and command. Allah created the universe, سماء رفعها. And then there's the command, وضع الميزان. There's 2 things happening at the same time. The world of khalq and the world of amr. Creation and command. Tabarakallahu Rabbul Alameen. So I've talked to you about the notion of sky and the notion of raised. And actually these things. But the last thing I didn't talk to you about. Before the discovery that the earth is not the center of the universe. And that, for a long time humanity believed that the sun revolves around the earth. Right? And they were still observing the stars. But they couldn't figure it out. And it was so much chaos. They had to come up with all these weird, pathways for the stars. And it was all chaotic. And then when we finally figured out that actually the earth is rotating around the sun, not the other way around, then the constellations and the stars and the navigation, all of it started making sense all of a sudden. In fact, the more we studied the universe, the more harmony we found, not the more chaos. That's actually actual history. Right? And it teaches us something. When your worldview is centered from earth, and you think the earth is at the center, you only get chaos. But when Allah mentioned the scale, He didn't mention the earth first. What did He mention first? The sky. When you're focused on the sky, you will find balance. And by the way, the idea of holding something up, is that exhausting or no? Yeah. Allah is saying fairness is not on autopilot. You have to exhaust yourself and hold it up. And just because you held it up yesterday doesn't mean you're holding it up today. So when people say, you know, I'm like a really fair person, that must be your zodiac sign, I think. You're a really fair person? Really? Because Allah says the rest of the universe is on autopilot when it comes to fairness. Human beings are not. They have to be told. You have to do it. Why were we told that? Because that's the really hard thing for us to do.